else?
Mike, I have a different subject. I want to make sure we're done with this one.
Sure. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks.
So,
Okay, thank you all.
So Mike, I want to go back to what you started your report with, and for everybody else, I went to one of Mike's community sessions on the levee the other evening, and I know you're really pretty busy, but you're doing a bunch of these.
Yep.
And I think it's admirable. I want to say thank you for doing them. Please continue to do whatever you can do to be available to the community. I mean, really, as you've done so well since you came on board, I think just over a year ago now, right? Just over a year. So thank you for that. And it was a really interesting session for me. It triggers a second comment, which I won't get to until we get to the treasurer's report about reserves. But it made me think about really going back to when our family first moved here, which was just a few months after 9/11, over 20 years ago now. It's hard to believe. And the important part of it is that, and I'll remember this forever. Being at church the following Sunday after 9/11, and the feeling of togetherness, the strength, what I think of as the reassurance that comes from community. It was really quite powerful. And in contrast to that, unfortunately, regrettably today, it feels pretty far from those days. It really feels very distant in some respects. And the key message for me is that I don't think it needs to be that way. I think we can have disagreements on issues without tearing what I call the fabric of the community apart. I know that people will be on different sides of the levy question. I completely get that. Some will support it, some will not. That's, every household is different. And the reality is on most issues, we'll never have perfect alignment across the community. But that's why there's a system to decide issues and allow voters to make the call. So once again, I think I've done this a number of times since this levy discussion started. I know other board members have done it as well. But I'll just ask everyone to argue the facts, versus going down pathways that tear at us, divide us, isolate us. All of that, in the end, just makes us less than who we are. And I think that we'll all still be neighbors on the morning of November 9th. We'll still be neighbors then. And I like to believe that's kind of a useful way to think about how we talk to each other on the journey into November. Agreeing to disagree is a pretty good line to stop at. So please, everybody, just stop there. Don't pit one of us against the other, and just be respectful of each other as we all work towards getting the various perspectives on this issue out in front of everyone. Thank you for those sessions.
I appreciate it. The sessions have gone very, very well. I enjoy it. I've learned a lot of where the neighborhoods are now. I know where Woodford is and where the neighborhoods are. Everybody in person, it's always been very respectful, challenging sometimes, but that's okay. We should have answers for it. But I've enjoyed it, and everybody has been very respectful. And I think if you look back in June when we initiated all of this, we said that's the goal, is let's stay in community and understand people do have other differing opinions, but we should be able to have positive discourse in the same regard. But I appreciate you saying that, Kevin.
Thank you. Well, I hate to say it, but we're going to go from the sublime, which was hearing from about the students and the teachers and the administrators, and from hearing about the community, and we're going to move to a board resolution that's a policy manual update, and it's concerning the policy on headlights. So that's somewhat less sublime than where we've been, but anyway, I will just remind you, before we have that resolution, I will remind board members that so far in our policy manual work, we have rescinded a large number of unnecessary policies. We have confirmed the retention of the high and required policies, and we are currently having administrative work done on the medium policies as well as the high policies to see what we have to review besides the head lice policy. I will also let you know that one short item that we will have at the December 10th meeting that you've all agreed to is taking a look at the 000 policies, the bylaws that are the board policies, because they have to do with how we do our work. And so we'll take a look at a few of those and make sure that we're in the right spot with those. So just so you know, we're not done once we approve this head lice policy. We're not finished. So at this time, it would be appropriate for a resolution to approve the revision of policy 8451.
As the most neutral party on head lice, make that motion.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. Mrs. Washburn seconded. You know, I got to thinking we didn't have a lot of problems with head lice when we were all home for the pandemic. I mean, if you're looking for silver linings, maybe, I don't know.
I don't know.
It's too much low hanging fruit.
I'll stay away from it.
Okay, I thought so. All right, any comments or questions? Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Reverend Isaac.
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
Mr. Doherty.
Yes.
Dr. Levin.
Yes.
Dr. Schweitzer.
Yes.
Motion carried. We then move to Director of Human Resources items, and there are 4 this time. Is that correct? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 separate items that we'll work on. Would the board like to have a report from Mr. Collier as we move along in those, or do you want to hear from him first and then we'll do the 4 items? What's the board preference? I'm not seeing anything. What's your preference, Mr. Collier?
How about we just go one at a time and we'll move.
Got it. So the first item is a motion to ratify and confirm the termination of Michael Molesky effective October 7th, 2022. We need a motion for that. So moved. Mrs. Washburn moved, and I will second that motion. Any questions? Mr. Collier, any report?
No, I just would like to make sure that the board knows that there is a little bit of information in your administrative content. And if, of course, if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. I'd be glad to work with you.
All right. Seeing nothing else, can we vote on that?
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
Dr. Levin.
Yes.
Mr. Doherty.
Yes.
Reverend Isaac.
Yes.
And Dr. Schweitzer.
Yes.
Motion carried. Second item is to approve the Loveland High School varsity softball team trip. We're not sending them to Cocoa Beach permanently. I think it's a trip they're going to take. But they're going to Cocoa Beach, Florida, April 2nd through 8th, 2023. And so do we have a motion for that?
So moved.
Mr. Doherty moved, and a second?
Second.
Reverend Eilert seconded. And again, that is an opportunity for the softball team. Needs board approval for any travel outside of the district. Mr. Collier, any other information on that?
No, really the only information I want to make sure to let you guys know is that just like these have been in the past, not only, I mean, we heard about academics today, building principals were able to talk about all of the pieces on the report card that pertain to academics and how we have done pretty well compared to other districts, not only in our region but across the state. But there are lots of other things that happen in our school district, and our students, whether in competitions for the arts like our show choir or some of our athletic teams, traveling out of state for competitions is something we talked about it at our last meeting with the cheerleading group. This time it happens to be a softball group. The main thing that I want to make sure that everybody hears is that district money isn't being used for these type of trips. This is no different than all the ones in the past. We have support from our athletic boosters. There is fundraising that is going on. And if there is any additional cost past that amount of money, that individual families would be, the bill would go to them. It sounds like to me, I was talking with Mr. Bryant, our athletic director, and he was telling me that this particular trip, they are thinking that the fundraising is going really well, that even the families aren't going to have to foot any money for that. The fundraising has been really great. So, again, glad to be able to bring this to the board for our teams to be able to compete not only in our region in Ohio, but outside of our state and across the country. This is just another example of our kids really being able to have really great opportunities and at it coming at no cost to the school district, of course, is something that's super important. And other than that, there is some information in your administrative section about this particular trip. But again, if you have any questions, please let Mr. Bryant, our athletic director, or myself know. Glad to work.
I think thanks to the community that's made that happen.
Yeah, I've got to tell you, we are really fortunate here. And there are times when people talk about, are you reaching out to make sure that there are other ways for funding for things? And, we heard lots of different examples tonight. When we were doing the student reports, there was a dance-a-thon fundraiser that was happening for, I believe, the LEPTA, and that raised $50,000, and that money's going right back into our classrooms with teachers and students. Here's an example of something where lots of our teams are able to do fundraising with community support to be able to do things that we wouldn't be able to offer those things if we were going to be using district money, but because we have such a supportive community, those things are able to happen, which is great.
If you're disappointed you haven't been able to buy a butter braid yet from the show choir, Lynn and I can talk to you afterwards. The order's going tomorrow.
All my money went to the dance-a-thon, sorry.
And
The
butter
third
braids
grader
have nothing to
dancing.
do with hair.
Money
It's
well
not braiding
spent.
hair, so we're good.
All right, thanks. Any other comments about the trip? Can we vote on that?
Mr. Doughty?
Yes.
Reverend Adler?
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz?
Yes.
Dr. Schweitzer?
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes, motion carried. Then we move on to all of the human resource items. So we need a motion to approve the resolutions of the Director of Human Resources, including resignations and employment of certified, classified, homebound, substitute, and supplemental positions for the 2022-2023 school year. When I stop being on the school board, I'll really miss reading that resolution. I really read that one.
I'll call you once a month. You can go ahead and
So we have a
read that
motion
off.
for that?
Yeah.
So moved.
Okay.
Second. I heard Mr. Doherty and Mrs. Washburn.
So you just get a recording of you.
Pardon?
Get a recording of you.
Oh, okay. You just play it.
You're not starting any rumors about that, though.
I'm not, no, I'm saying I will miss that at some point in my life. Yes.
Far, far distant future.
All right, any questions? Mr. Collier, report.
Yes, there are a couple of different pieces that are in the public section for this. I want to make sure to draw your attention to, before we get to all of those typical HR items, I want to make sure to talk about that at our last board meeting, there was some discussion about this FTE chart, FTE meaning full-time equivalent. It's in essence our staffing chart, okay? And the discussion at the last board meeting was being able to bring this to the board, have discussion around it, and for it to be out there for everyone to be able to see. So there's a lot going on here, but with basically trying to break these down into some different categories. I know as board members, you have seen this chart before. I just want to make sure to let you guys know this is going to be a monthly practice for us at our business meetings. I'm going to be coming prepared with the most up-to-date recent FTE chart for you guys to be able to go through. A couple of items from the beginning of this year until now. You'll notice the two columns for the 2022-2023 school year. We have a snapshot in August, and then we have a snapshot in October. So I want to make sure to point out the highlights of the differences between those two columns so you can see the things that have happened from the beginning of our school year until now that have an impact on our FTE chart. So the first thing that I will bring up is something that is obviously concerning. We've talked about this at multiple board meetings, and if you go somewhat towards the middle of the chart, there is a transportation/mechanic section, and you can see In August, we were at 43, and now we are sitting at 38, and that is bus drivers. So just to keep in mind, we are down 5 bus drivers. Some explanation of this, if you kind of look at the bottom, there is a notes section at the bottom that has information I'm going to highlight for you. Another highlight I would want to make sure that you guys are aware of, again, something we've talked about with you guys, is that during this school year, we had a resignation with our EMIS position. That historically has been an administrator's position. Once we had a resignation there, we were able to change that position to an exempt position. So you'll notice in the highlighted yellow kind of color, we were at 27, that moves us down to 26, but the spot right below that for exempt, it was at 12, and you'll see it's an increase to 13, reflecting that change. The only other thing I want to make sure to point out would be if you go up and you take a look in the ESSER column, all right, and you look at the paraprofessional spot for ESSER column, you can see that at the beginning of the school year in August, we had 3 paraprofessionals that we are paying their salary out of our ESSER funds. And some of that information was talked about tonight with some reading support. If you remember, we had an ELL English learners parapro position that's in that count, and also our reading intervention support paraprofessionals are in that count as well. But you'll see that there's an increase for this month, and this is something that I talked about in my board report. It's basically, we have a student who's moved in, and per their IEP, with their needs, there needs to be an adult with them at all times. And so that's what that's for. Questions for me about the FTE chart and the idea of the business of us bringing this to the table every month for review?
Garth, we had a community member, I think it was Alan, earlier, ask, or wonder out loud, I think is what he was doing, what the district has done to save money and to keep it under control. And this is an example. I think, I'm not going to be unfair to you by saying this isn't necessarily your idea. This was going on a little bit before
Yeah.
you got into the role too, but
Yeah, absolutely.
you've really formalized it, and you've done a great job with this.
Yeah.
But the point is that headcount management, employment management, has been hands-on and a real focus for a good couple of years now. We didn't have this kind of data before. I think maybe because we weren't looking at it the same way before. But we have been for some time. And this is one of the key ways that not only did you save money, but you're keeping the savings on the books going forward and not allowing it to grow.
Yeah, I think that this, I mean, to be honest, there's lots of things that are involved in my role in the day-to-day, but I would tell you one of the major goals for myself is to be making sure that there is close watch. And we've basically, Mike and I have committed to you saying, not only have we been since we've been in these roles, but we will continue regardless of levy outcome of this type of focus when it comes to our head count, our FTE count, because, this is something that I know that you guys know, but so much of our budget is with our staff. You know, we're talking over 85% of our budget is with our staff. So of course, this needs to be where the focus is. And what you were able to see tonight with our building principals is that the balance of this, the balance of being fiscally responsible, making sure that we are adequately staffed, but also making sure that we are meeting the needs of our students, and it's a constant balancing act. And when we come to you talking about any type of position that's needed, or if we're going to reallocate a position where we have somebody who is maybe stepping away or resigning, where is that FTE most crucial? Where can we plug someone in? Those are the things that Mike and I work on pretty much on a daily basis, making sure that we are keeping each other in check to make sure that this information is accurate, and making sure that we're reporting back to you guys for you to be able to see how much of an importance this is to us.
So this chart to me is the documentation of a management practice that you guys are disciplined about, have been doing it, you do it every day. You know, if there's questions about the district being transparent, this is an example of trying to put it all out there so people can actually see what's going on.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kevin. I think from my office's standpoint, from the HR office, this is, if not the most important thing that we can do. Our staff is the business, is what my business is, right? And Mike has made it very clear, not in a negative way with me at all, but made it very clear that this is important. This will drive our decision making, and we are making sure, and we will be providing this information for everyone, and that we have mechanisms in place to make sure that these type of things don't go out of control. And I will tell you that this is not necessarily, we're not the only HR department or district that does this, but to this extent, and to be having it something that we're going to bring to the board every month is not necessarily something that is very common with all districts. But we think it's important. It's important for you guys as the leaders of this community and the school district, and for our community as a whole, to see what's going on, because there isn't anything here that we are wanting to hide from anyone.
It wasn't that long ago that I looked at charts not dissimilar from this in corporate America on a monthly basis as well. I would call this kind of a thing, kind of an industry best practice. Everybody might not do it, but it's a great way to exert control over the most difficult and most expensive part of the business. So thank you for doing this, and keep it up.
We talked about establishing what is the baseline for what we talked about in the levy.
Right.
So will it be the 501 that we're at essentially at the beginning of the year?
So what we'll do is Garth and I have daily conversations because we want to make sure we nail this down. But we want to look at, once the levy is passed, we will nail down exactly and let the board approve what the thoughts are. But the FTEs is going to be very, very important because there's going to have to be some conversation, because when you look at, for example, the transportation mechanics, we can't use the 38 number because we're down if we can hire more. So there's going to have to be some conversation. But I think looking at it, the one part of the levy that we have discussed is the 5 FTEs and the certified, that's teachers. So the teachers, when you look at 254.7, that's where we are right now. And so we would look at that as the baseline. It is, and I always relate to this position as like being a father, and I've got 5 kids, and sometimes that's difficult because we want to manage finances, but we also want to make sure we educate kids. And so when you talk about alternative funding, it was pretty evident that we needed some more support in the reading specialist category. What we didn't want to do was put that into the general fund as positions. We wanted to use ESSER funding as much as possible. And ESSER funds, in essence, are alternative funds that do run out. And so, it's a long-winded answer to your question. I think the baseline, the number one we need to look at is teachers, because that is what we have said we would like to look at as we move forward due to enrollment or other programming that we talked about earlier. And so we've got a pretty good idea of where we would be with that.
Something else that comes into play is our kindergarten being opened up for full-day kindergarten. If you guys remember that we talked about this at length, and as a board, the decision was made like, hey, we know that our families are wanting more of this, so we opened it up, and we had an increase in there. So you would be able to tell in the notes when you look at that top line where it says teachers in the green, and you can see we've been pretty consistent here. We were able to take some positions and do some reallocation with some positions, but the 254.7 does include some kindergarten teachers, but remember that full day kindergarten was offset with tuition costs. So even though that number is up, that it's not indicative that we're spending more money there. That's why we added the kindergarten notes, just so you guys and everybody could see that in 21-22 we were at 7 full day K teachers, and for this year we're at 10. So and you can see through the notes of where the FTEs were and kind of follow through to see where those FTEs are. But just because there is an additional FTE in the teacher column, it is not because it's not, in essence, it's being, that increase is being paid for with the tuition piece for full day K.
My only question is, was your color choice with transportation intentional? The transportation's in the red.
No, it wasn't.
Pretty good.
But yeah, we, as you guys know, the district committed to that transportation incentive proposal. Since we have done that, other districts have jumped on board. And of course, the districts are just one-upping the previous district. So, our transportation incentive proposal that, we talked about and we have in place, some area schools have just increased theirs, and now they have the same kind of thing, which is the way it goes. It's okay. But that is something that we are continuing to look at. We are continuing to try and look to find ways how we can attract new drivers, because as you can see, over time, there has been a major decrease in the number of drivers over the past couple of years.
The market will find a way to sort it out.
I'm hoping so.
Garth, if you could make that road green is what I'm hearing, it should change where
No, I
we're
think you
headed.
should change it to yellow because of the school
Yeah.
bus color. But then I think the administrators might be upset if you put them in the red. So that could be an issue there, so.
Garth, just to chime in real fast on two things that you already know. The first one being, our ESSER funds run out and we're using those for 6.5 positions right now. And the second one, and just to remind all of us, we've added a paraprofessional full-time for one student, which is obviously very costly. Are we reimbursed by the state for that expense later?
Yeah, there is something that is called catastrophic cost, and that has to do with special education and the students that we serve. And getting into a conversation about catastrophic costs right now wouldn't be beneficial. But there is a mechanism for us to be able to recoup some of that money. We have to gather data. Mr. Coles and our Treasurer's Department works together. Actually, we were at a meeting this morning where Mr. Coles was talking about his plan for this year for us to collect that data, when it has to be handed in, for us to maximize the amount of money that we can recoup from the state with in terms of catastrophic costs. It's something that Mr. Giuffre helped us out with last year, and we did some things, making sure that we did the best that we could with that amount of money this past school year, and now we have a plan for this year to be able to maximize it as well. It isn't necessarily always 100%, but we are able to recoup some of that money. Good point.
Well, I just wanted to bring it up because I know that behind the scenes you're working very hard to ensure that we're keeping our costs down. And
Yeah.
even when you see things like that, there's two things that come to my mind. One is public schools are burdened with costs that other schools are not burdened with. And the second one is we're working very hard to mitigate that cost.
Yeah, Eric, Dr. Schwarzenau, excuse me. We are doing everything we can to make sure that we are having the budget that we have stretch as far as we can, while at the same time providing the service that our kids need. And every time something like this comes up, we are trying to make decisions and are making decisions that is, in the end, the most fiscally responsible thing for us to do while still achieving our goal, which is servicing our kids. Yep.
And thanks for this chart. I think that's great, and that helps us all out. Where have we been? Where are we going? What are our plans?
Absolutely.
Don't change the colors too much because we'll get confused.
I'm not changing them at all. If there aren't any other questions about the FTE chart, I'm going to have that chart, like I said, every month. And maybe our conversations at some months will be more in depth. Maybe at some months it'll be more of a surface level, but it's going to be something I'm bringing to you each time. There are a couple of things I want to make sure to point out to you in the quote regular kind of HR business section. We have some additions from when this was first put out for you guys. That is at the very bottom for F and G. Also in section F, you can see that we, especially with some secretary roles, there has been lots of dominoes. So just making sure, like org chart wise, when you show up at a building or you're making a phone call, that we have different folks in different positions secretarially. We are really happy with the folks that we've been able to find for these roles. Many of them have been folks who have just moved from one particular role into another, but just making sure to point that out.
So as folks look at this from the outside, we did not hire 4 new secretaries. We moved people from one secretary position into
You got
another.
it.
So
Yeah.
they're new secretaries where they are, but we did not hire 4 new people.
That is correct. Yep, there is not any additional secretary listed here whatsoever. Going back to more towards the top of some things that were in the report. Sorry, I'm not being very brief, but just making sure. I know there's a lot here. In section B, I just want to make sure to point out, if you recall, we talked about that we had a resignation of a kindergarten teacher. The particular teacher that we have since hired, she has been working, she's in the classroom, things are going well. It was just after our last meeting when she was able to start, so it hasn't been on the agenda until now. But Maggie is there. I don't want anybody to think that that's an additional FTE either. That is from the resignation we had, and we were lucky to be able to find her, and we are glad that she is with us.
Can she drive a bus too?
No, but I have a feeling Mike might ask me to get my CDL here pretty soon. I'm sure. If there aren't any other questions, I'm finished with that particular section.
Anything else? All right, can we vote on that, Mr.
Mr.
Dufresne?
Dougherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes.
Mayor Riley?
Yes.
Dr. Lenz?
Yes.
Dr. Schweitzer?
Yes.
Motion carried. And then we have one more item, which is not an action item. It is the first reading of the 23-24 calendar. I'll let Mr. Carter talk about it, but this is a requirement that a school calendar be given a first reading. This is an opportunity for community members to see it. It is published on board docs, and it is an opportunity for community members to ask questions, to come to the next meeting when it will be on the agenda for approval, to make comments about it, just a chance to see the calendar. But you tell us how it's come this far, because
Okay.
I don't want to take away your whole report.
Oh, no, it's fine. Yes, it's a requirement. We want to make sure that we get this out to our families as soon as possible. People like to make plans, and being able to see what happens in the future school years calendar-wise is important to folks. There were a couple of things I want to make sure to point out. The main structure of the calendar for the 23-24 year is a lot like the calendar in this current school year that we have. We had lots of success with our rolling start, if you remember of us talking about that, with half of our students starting on the quote first day of school, and then the second half of our students on that second day of school. We were able to get a lot of positive feedback about that. That is something that is in this calendar for the 23-24 year as well. The October in-service day, there was lots of discussion. Maybe we were going to move some of that information. It is, in essence, in the same area as it is this year. We just got finished with ending our first quarter and having our work/in-service day followed by a full in-service day on the Friday, Monday, just this past weekend. And that is similar to the 23-24. Something else to note is that we haven't had it yet for this particular calendar for this year, but Thanksgiving week, which is the most heavily traveled holiday that there is, we have lots of families in Loveland who historically have not been sending their kids to school on Monday and Tuesday of Thanksgiving week because they're traveling for the holiday. We now have that as a full week for students to be able to be off, and that's in this calendar as well. In addition to that, it is a leap year in 2024, so that had a little bit of change for us. And then if you will just notice that spring break is encompassing the Good Friday and Easter Sunday piece, and that the Monday following that is also a day off for folks, and that's been a change that we haven't had in the past, hence the leap year piece for that. So I want to make sure to say thanks. This calendar was created in conjunction with our OPSI leadership and our LEA leadership. This particular calendar in the past has just been a kind of like a management piece. We always want to make sure that we're working with our folks, so thanks to them, counting days, do we have the correct number of student days, staff days, all of their help from both of those leadership groups, we really appreciate it. And if you guys have any questions after looking at this, again, feel free to give me a buzz, but I think we're ready to roll.
Garth, just, I know when you went through, we have kind of a large view of holidays, religious holidays, different things like that, but you made sure you took that into consideration as much as possible when you
Yeah,
went
we
through.
did. We taking a look at lots of different religious holidays for different groups. We tried to encompass as many things that we could in this particular calendar, making sure to, as best we can, take all those things into consideration. And there isn't a quote perfect calendar for that, but it was a part of our conversations, and thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, thanks. I know calendar seems like it should be easy, but it's a little bit of a Rubik's Cube in a school district, so thanks to Garth for working with both associations.
Okay, and that will come back next month for approval.
Sounds correct.
All right, thank you. I think we're done with you.
All right. So,
Thanks, Garth.
Thank you, Garth.
Thanks. And we'll move on to the treasurer. So we move on to financial reports, and so if we could have a motion to accept the financial reports for September 2022.
So moved.
Second. Dr. Swetchnall moved and Mrs. Washburn seconded. Mr. Giuffre, any report for us?
Oh, I was wanting to make sure this, if you can give me your auditor survey tonight, it'd probably be great for you because it takes less time to fill out than it does to walk to the car, so you won't have to worry about it. No, nothing special. The forecast is not due till the end of November, and obviously after we will update our forecast accordingly.
I noticed that we had different, we have an additional investment report because of the change in the investment portfolio, so there's a different report this month.
Thanks for bringing that up because the NFS report that we would be getting in the future is not the same as the meter report that we've had in the past. So I have a spreadsheet that's based on maturities, so it's easy to follow. The NFS report only has two pieces of data on it that are worth anything, and that's how much was paid out and what the cash balance is for the money market account. They base it upon the treasuries, the one-year treasuries, and so it isn't the cost basis that we're used to seeing in the meter report, so that's why I created that spreadsheet.
And remind me what NSF is. I had a mother who was a
National Financial Services.
Okay, it's NFS because NSF makes me think non-sufficient funds.
Right.
So I just wanted to make sure I
National
was.
Science Foundation.
Yes, but I just wanted to make sure I was hearing the letters correctly. Thank you.
And Rob, I know that you talked about this before, but I go back to highlight both the transparency and the fiscal responsibility portion of this. We had initially invested these funds before your arrival with Meter, and they were charging us a monthly fee. They were not updating the portfolio or adjusting it, and you said, why are we paying money for them to keep something in place that's already set up? I can do this. So we're saving several $1,000s over the course of the next year,
Right.
and in an ongoing fashion with that change.
Right, right, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Lee, did you want to?
Should we vote on
I
this?
think we should vote first and then I'll
Okay.
You have a financial
I have a
comment?
financial comment
All right.
that I think is good.
All right, so if we can vote on that.
Very good. Dr. Schwetzenau,
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Mr. Darby,
Yes.
Governor Island,
Yes.
and Dr. Lorenz.
Yes, motion carried. Now, I believe that
If I
Mr.
could
Doherty
read it,
has
unless
indicated
Rob,
he
you have
has.
anything else?
I do not.
Okay, so I mentioned this earlier, and I apologize for talking so much tonight. There's just been a lot around this levy issue that I thought needed to get out there. But one of the questions that came up at Mike's community meeting was about a so-called $14 million cash reserve the district is sitting on. This has come up more times than I can count, and I'm going to take one more shot at trying to explain this thing. Oops, something's going on with my computer here. Stand by for a second. Okay.
And,
Wait. Yeah, okay, I'll come back to that in a second. All right, so to be clear, there is no $14 million cash quote-unquote reserve. That does not exist. There is a thing that we call a cash balance in the district's accounts that I always say is very much like a household checking account. Money comes in our case, largely from twice a year county property tax receipts, and payments go out, largely for salaries and benefits, and those occur pretty evenly through the year at about $4.5 to $5 million per month. Just like that household checking account, we look great on payday and not so great after the mortgage gets paid. The district's payments go out pretty flat month to month, but revenues are incredibly lumpy, and I'll go to this chart here in a moment. And the timing of those revenues is not under the district's control. Sometimes there's a little bit of shift, 1 month forward or backwards. So that balance fluctuates wildly. The key number is when the balance drops to a level, so the low points of the year, where you get concerned there won't be enough to cover the checks that are written in any given month. And that's the reason the treasurer tries to forecast revenue and expenses and highlight early, enough in advance, when the community needs to decide on a levy. Taxes can only be adjusted once a year through a community vote, so there's a lot of looking forward and estimating in this process. I'm a little bit of a financial guy, and I trust Rob, but there's this old trust and verify thing. And I like to get comfortable with the numbers on my own. So I took a little bit of time and developed, let's see here, is this on my computer or on yours? Mine. On yours, okay. All right, let me see if this is going to work for me. Yeah, this will work for me. Okay, so I developed this recap by looking at, I think it was 51 months of Rob's monthly reports, the treasurer's reports. Actually, two treasurers, I think, or at least one more treasurer preceding Rob, 51 months of history on our cash balance reports, where we show revenues, i.e. receipts, we show disbursements, and we show net cash balances. And that's what this chart represents. I've got this big blue box over on the right side covering up part of this for just a moment, because I want to do this a step at a time. But this thing that Eric might think looks like an EKG is actually our cash balance from month to month to month between June of 2018 and August of 2022. A couple of things to take note of here. The 14 million that we're talking about is a real number, but it just happens to be right there. It is a fiscal year-ending balance, and that's about as interesting as, I don't know, it's just not interesting. What's really interesting is the fluctuations here and how the low points in time occur. And I could draw a trend line through this, and you could see it have about a 45-degree slope going from the upper left to the lower right. That cash balance decreases over time. There are two other points of note here. There's a yellow line that represents 2 months of expenses, so roughly $9 million. And that's, Rob may look at it differently, but I've always been told that the treasurers around the state use a couple of months as a balance they don't really feel comfortable dropping below. Because if you're off in tax receipts by a month, you get really close to perhaps not having enough cash in the bank to cut the checks that you're writing that month. The red line is just simply 1 month of expenses, and you can see that in this period of time between 18 and 22, we were going down. We were starting actually to hit that that $9 million threshold, but we really weren't yet in danger of breaching the 1 month expense threshold. But if you drew a line through this, it wasn't that much further into the future that problem would occur. That's when I think we all got very serious, especially on the heels of the failed levies, to start to address financial strategies within the district to make cash last. So can I go to the next slide now? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, thank you. You also might notice that things kind of level out a bit in this time period. And the best research I could do on that points towards the influence of ESSER monies, which are outside of the general fund. They're actually in a separate fund, so we don't account for them the same way. And that's, I think, largely what's going on in here. Now, if I go to the next slide, I move the block over to the left side to show what happens when you do my brand of forecasting, which is far less detailed than what Rob goes through. All I did here at the macro level was to say, property taxes historically grow at about 1% per year. That's new property sales within the district, commercial property tax growth, etc. So 1% is what we historically see. And 2.5%, to pull a number out of the air, I might be good with 3% or something in that neighborhood, but 2.5% expense growth against that projected property tax growth, sequenced over the course of the year that we historically see inflows and outflows. So you're able to see kind of a long-term projected view of what our cash balances would be. And
How many
again,
months out are you on there?
this is out to, I think, 26 or so. And if I go to the next slide. So this is the picture over time. We're coming down. We encounter levy failures. We encounter COVID. We encounter ESSER mitigation. Things are a little hard to understand for a period of time. And then we just kind of pick it up here. Going forward, ESSER money runs out. Those headcount that are being paid for by ESSER are now coming out of the general fund. We have a little bit of revenue growth, and the world continues, except that now we're starting to routinely reach this yellow 2-month line, and we actually start to come real close and eventually break through the balance that would support our monthly payments. That's a problem. Can I have the next slide? So the thing to look at here is not the $14 million year-ending cash balance. It's the blue dots, which are the low balance points of the year. And that's the reason for concern. That's the reason that the district, I think, came to us when they came to us this year and said, we see a problem coming. These numbers end up not being too different from what Rob had given us in his projections. But this is arrived at really a totally different way. And I think it gives me, confidence that the timing is very, very difficult for this levy, but you don't get to always choose when you run out of cash. And that's kind of the situation that they're forecasting, and the reason that this levy is in front of everybody at this point in time. So I thought I'd just give a little texture to the $14 million thing.
Just because nobody can read the timeline at the bottom, the blue dots generally represent the beginning of a calendar year.
Yeah, they're generally Januaries.
January of 23 would be the first blue dot after now.
That would be correct.
M's represent a year.
Roughly,
So you go,
roughly
so
speaking,
up with
sure.
receipt, down with expenses,
Yeah.
up with receipts,
The
yeah.
peaks are checks coming in for property taxes, basically. So we're flush with cash. I said $14 million means nothing, because there's plenty of points in there where we're in the 20s.
Right.
So 14 doesn't tell you anything.
We have 23 million now.
We have 23 million right now, Eric says, and there are points where, we've been down to 9 million. So it varies significantly. That's not the point. 14 million is just happenstance based on the way things flow in and out. What's really important is, can you cover the checks that you're writing? And there gets to be points in the not so distant future. This model, the end of 23, we start to get close. 24 is clearly a problem. And you can vary these assumptions to do whatever you want with them, but I think those are fairly conservative, 1%, 2.5% assumptions up there. If I was to put 3.5% expense growth, we compress the problem to a much sooner point in time. It also is helpful if the levy doesn't pass. This is the problem that the district is going to have to find its way to navigate through. It's going to have to make changes to make this work. So, I know it's a little complicated. I tried to keep it out of the NBA world, but MBA world.
And the NBA.
Dribbling the ball.
Yeah, right. I tried to keep it as simple as I could, but it's, school finances are not an easy, intuitive subject.
I would only interject my disclaimer that I have to say every single time that we look at these. This is fantastic, Kevin, because it really does show a very clear picture. From now, and in between the first blue dot and the second blue dot, after now, there will be another biennial budget.
Here to here. And I'm not factoring in the state changing its funding formulas and saving more money or any of those kinds of exogenous events.
And to go back to what Rob was just referencing, the state right now is supporting us more than they claim that they should be. So it is very possible that in the next biennial budget, they decrease their funding.
Right.
They've said that they won't do that. That's very different than not doing it.
Okay, that's all I have.
Is that all for Mr. Giuffre's report? And we voted on what we needed to vote on, correct? Yes. All right, all that is left on our agenda this evening is a resolution to go into executive session. For those who are still here in attendance with us, we appreciate that. Let you know that there is no action planned for after executive session. And for those who are listening to this after the fact, I'm hoping that this is not, because we have a backup on a backup, this is not going to be shown in one of those infinite things where it gets a view inside a view inside a view, right? It's
Well, this is on my cell phone, so you never know what's going to happen.
You never know. Anyway, for those who are now taking the time to listen to this well after the fact, we'll let you know that the video will stop, and then we will come back after executive session and adjourn the meeting on videotape. But I know Mr. Ames is not thrilled with that, but that's what we normally do. If this board has a different preference, we could simply say there's no action after executive session. We'll come back and adjourn, and we'll make a note of that somehow in the video that we went into executive session at a certain time, came out at a certain time, and adjourned 30 seconds after that. Is that all right with the board that we stop the...
I've always been curious as to why we
Stop the madness?
come back, right?
And film?
Yep.
Okay. We will come back and adjourn publicly if anybody wants to
What's coming
sit
much?
here. All right, so that's the plan. Sorry, Mr. Ames. We're going to have a motion in a moment, hopefully, to go into executive session. We'll go into executive session. We'll keep time on that. We'll come back out. We'll have a motion to adjourn, and we'll make a note of that time as well in the minutes, and hopefully we'll be able to post it somehow on the video. But that's our plan for this evening. Invited into executive session is definitely our superintendent, is our treasurer. I don't think, so we'll just report to you the adjournment when it's done. Okay, you're all free to go.
Do you need a motion?
I do, yes.
So
Just
moved.
letting them know.
Second.
So there's a motion to go into executive session by Dr. Swetchnow, seconded by Mr. Doherty. It is to enter into executive session in accordance with ORC section 121.22G1, which is for the purpose of employment, evaluation, and compensation of a public employee. So we have that motion, and we have a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I have us all going in at 8:49.
Not pretty.
And that's a cut.
And that's it.